But what do Labubus and the U.S. Treasury have in common? Well, some economic researchers, not us, but some economic researchers say that cheap toys could be an indicator of recession, something called the lipstick effect. Stick with me here, because the idea is that during economic downturns, people still spend on cheap luxuries like toys for kids without breaking the bank. But is it really a sign of things to come? Well, Brian Cheung is at the big boards to break it all down. Brian, level with us. Does this mean a recession is coming or what?
Yeah, Gotti, are you talking about these? Yeah, the Labubus. This one is real, by the way. No Lafufus that I'm dealing with, all right? This is the real deal. But yes, there is certainly the talk that these are a recession indicator. It's almost like that doom spending that you remember after the pandemic. There were a lot of people that were saying, hey, if I can't afford anything, if you're a Gen Z or millennial, kind of feeling the fatalism of never being able to afford a home, maybe I'll just splurge on luxuries in the now to make myself happy. Let me spend 3-4 times retail to buy this on resale because I'm not going to be able to afford anything anyway. I might as well be happy. That is certainly something that we're hearing from younger people, especially on TikTok. But I do want to point out, as far as the new inflation numbers that we got here, do you see that segue into the hard news here as I toss my Labubu over here? Inflation not necessarily showing that we're in a recession right now, because that figure that we just got, 2.7%, that's how much prices rose between July of this year and July of last year. That is certainly an uptick from what we saw in the earlier months of this year, but not necessarily recessionary when you consider that 2.7% is still certainly lower than the 3% figures that we had been seeing in the earlier part of the year. Now, when we take a look at this report by category, you can see these categories, which actually people will usually spend the most on, food, energy, and shelter, really not all that bad. In fact, not substantial inflation, at least in these categories, again, underscoring that we're not in a recession. Food prices going sideways. These are monthly figures that you're looking at. Energy costs going down actually by 1.1% between June and July, and shelter costs, this is the biggest cost for most Americans, just putting a roof over your head, up by 0.2%. So, okay, if these categories didn't lead to overall inflation rising, then why did inflation increase over the last few months? Why is it at 2.7% instead of at around 2%? Well, that's because of core inflation, and some of that could be due to tariffs. We saw furniture inflation. That's likely due to the China tariffs that have been in effect at around 30% for the past few months. But these are the categories that I'm going to be watching for in the months to come, because a lot of people might be saying, Brian, I thought that there were all these big tariffs put into place last week. Well, yes, that will not have been reflected in this inflation report, because this inflation report covers the month of July, not August. But going forward, think about a 50% tariff on coffee beans from Brazil, 35% on things coming in from Canada, 20% on clothing coming in from Vietnam, 15% on cheese coming in from the European Union. These are the monthly rates of inflation that we saw in this particular report. Not really any sort of substantial inflation in these three categories here: cars from Canada, clothing from Vietnam, and cheese from the EU. But take a look at coffee beans going up by just in 1 month, 2.3%. That is because of droughts in Brazil. This has been part of the story over the last few months. You can imagine this 50% tariff, that could start to bite, and we might start to see the impact of that in the next inflation report. So again, no recession right now. The Labubu is not necessarily verifying that from what we're seeing in this CPI data, but nonetheless something we're watching for in the months to come.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or watch live on our YouTube channel.